It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Florence Villeminot. Hi, Flo. This month, France is marking the 50th anniversary of May 1968. Now, this date is a real turning point in French history, a social and cultural revolution.
And you really can't underestimate the importance of May 68 at the time and its legacy today. Now, I don't have enough time to go into all the details of what happened during that very intense period, but essentially a leftist student movement that started in March of 1968 grew into a full-blown political clash that came to a violent head in May. Now, there's kind of a misconception about May 68 and the idea that it was a kind of a hedonist revolution of middle-class young Parisians challenging authority. Now, it's true that the epicenter of the movement was at La Sorbonne University in the Saint-Germain, so the kind of the heart of Paris on the left bank, but seeing it as just a clash of generations between post-war baby boomers and their parents, essentially, doesn't really do it justice.
And it's true because part of the reason this movement became so huge across France was because workers across the country joined in with the students, making this a multi-generational movement.
It was massive. They actually staged the biggest strike in French history yet, and it pretty much ground the country to a halt. It was essentially a general challenge of authority that definitely contributed to the myth that France is a land of striking. Just listen to Daniel Cohn-Bendit, who was actually one of the student leaders who essentially led the protest at the time.
There were revolts everywhere, but a general strike on that scale, it only happened in France. It's a French specialty, made in France. May 1968 is typically made in France. It's something French people are proud of. They say, we were wonderful, it was extraordinary, and we were the best.
Daniel Cohn-Bendit, who's still active in politics today. May 1968 has become a cornerstone of modern French history, but also of pop culture.
Well, there's a lot of romanticism surrounding the kind of aesthetics, I guess you could say, of May 68. These beautiful young protesters hurling cobblestones at the riot police known as CRS here in France. Now, a lot of the slogans used on posters at the time have kind of become national trademarks. There's one, for instance, that says, "Sous les pavés, la plage," under the cobblestones, there's the beach. And so that's one of many. Some of the people that were active at the time say that these slogans are still relevant today.
Moi, je trouve qu'elles sont toutes.
All the slogans from May 68 still ring true today.
Sois jeune et tais-toi,
Be young and shut up.
c'est actuel.
That's still current. Let's keep fighting. They're all
Je
true
vois pas
today.
laquelle serait pas actuelle.
But it's really important to point out that May 68 wasn't just about slogans, it wasn't just about aesthetics. Things actually changed after that date.
Indeed. Now, in reaction to the rioting and to the mass demonstrations, the government organized collective negotiations with trade unions and management organizations, and this was known as the Accord de Grenelle. And a lot came out of these negotiations. For instance, minimum wage was increased by 35%, and there was an overall rise in salary. So a lot of changes happened. There was another consequence, which was the birth of the French women's liberation movement, because many women actually who participated in May 68 felt frustrated that their voices weren't heard enough.
It was a moment of freedom, of our bodies, of speech. But as young women, there was no space for us. In the meetings, men spoke, not the women.
The women's liberation movement was born out of May 68. But it was also a breaking point. We had to tell the men in these leftist organizations, okay guys, enough is enough. Now it's our turn to say what we want.
May 68 also a real turning point in the women's movement here in France. Not everyone, though, is happy with the legacy of May 68, and it's actually been a bit of a thorny issue for several presidents over the years on both sides of the political fence.
Indeed. Over the years, governments have actually often taken a hostile position with respect to May 68, because after all, these were protesters protesting against authority, so the government, I guess you could say. For instance, the socialist president, François Mitterrand, he called protesters young Catholic bourgeois and idiots. Now, unsurprisingly, it's on the right that the critics have been the most outspoken. Just listen to Nicolas Sarkozy. So this was in 2007, between the two rounds of the presidential election.
Here's my offer to the French people. Let's put an end to the ideas of May 68. Let's restore politics with morality, authority, respect, hard work, and national identity.
Now, as for the current president, Emmanuel Macron, he actually considered holding a commemoration for May 68, but backed down in the face of ongoing tensions with striking students and workers.
It's been 50 years since May 68. What's left of the spirit of the movement today, really?
Well, let's take a look at our word du jour, which is 68ard. So a 68ard is either someone who participated in May 68 or has maintained the spirit and ideas of May 68.
Because 68 is 68.
Yeah, that's right. 68, to point that out. 68 is 68. Now, 68ard or 68ards, if they're women, have a lot of critics. Now, some say that, as they've gotten older, as they've grown up, these 68ards have essentially sold out. They've become somewhat conservative. They've joined the establishment and kind of wasted a precious opportunity. But there's also a certain respect for 68ards. And indeed, whenever you see protests today of young people, there are comparisons that are made to May 68. It's kind of a rite of passage for young people to protest. It's kind of their May 68 moment. As for 68ards themselves, some feel quite nostalgic of that moment and say that the magic, the spirit, is gone.
The power of the street is gone. The culture of demonstrating and taking to the streets has been lost. People don't believe in it anymore.
So 50 years on, May 68 continues to be very emotional, it's very polarizing, but what's interesting is recent polls suggest that a majority of French people think it's important to defend the legacy of May 68, even though it's very divisive.
Flo, thank you so much for that. Don't forget, if you have any other questions about things about France or the French that you just don't understand, you can always send Flo a tweet at Flo Villeminot.